Hi guys, what's up? My name is Dylan. Welcome to the Popcorn Podcast. Hope everyone is doing amazing. Already getting the puns in there. I'm not too sure, but some of you might have actually heard of this this really low-key, small-scale, low-budget indie film coming out in a couple of days' time called Spider-Man Goes Homeless or something like that. Actually, one sec. Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home. Maybe it rings a bell, I don't know. In all seriousness, guys, Spider-Man No Way Home is coming out in just a few days' time, and like I'm sure many of you are, I'm so fucking excited. Look, I know I might be setting myself up for disappointment, but I just had to get this off my chest. I had to lay all the cards out there on the table before I walk into that cinema on December the 15th. But I think in order to fully understand and appreciate the present, we have to revisit the past, and that is exactly what I wanted to do for this video, guys. I wanted to take you guys on my personal Spider-Man journey, or at least my journey through live action. Not just talk about some of my favorite characters and my favorite moments over the years, but really discuss why this character in particular and why these films are and have always been so important to me. Just a heads up, guys, I won't be talking about Into the Spider-Verse, the Spider-Man games, or the Spider-Man animated series, even though all of those have had their part to play in my admiration for the character. But this video will primarily be focused on the live action films, the standalone films. So yeah, if you're a Spider-Man fan, a fan of superhero films, or just someone who wants to listen, hopefully you're in the right place. So without further ado, it's Peter time. In 2002, a film was released that changed my life. Although I was only 3 years of age at the time and would only come to properly view it in its entirety a couple of years later, the impact that this film would have on me in the years to come, in the years leading up to this very moment I'm speaking to you right now, was monumental to say the least. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was one of the first films I could remember watching. In fact, I think the only thing it really competes with in that department is this masterpiece, but I'll leave my thoughts on Jurassic Park for a different video. To me, I don't see this first Spider-Man film as, well, exactly that, a film. Instead, I see it, I feel it, I know it to be more an essential piece of my childhood, of my youth, and by extension, my life. It has no doubt played a massive part in my obsession for not just superheroes and for comic book films, but for films and storytelling as a whole. The story of Peter Parker was one of the first stories that I ever connected with in my life. As a kid, I saw myself in Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. Why? Well, it's not something I think I can fully explain, because it was more so this inherent feeling that I had every time I put in that DVD and pressed the play button. But I think fundamentally there was something incredibly powerful, incredibly moving, incredibly inspiring to me about watching a person journey from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Like seriously guys, if I could get $1 for every time I did this in front of the mirror, or try to climb up a wall only to fall flat on my ass, I'd be as rich as Norman fucking Osborn. Speaking of Norman Osborn,
you know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
This motherfucker is the king of jump scares.
Oh shit! What the fuck?
I mentioned that this first Spider-Man film contributed massively to my love for movies, and one of the reasons why that was the case was because it gave me a taste for what film as an art form was capable of. And what I mean by that is that it demonstrated to me that a movie was something that could make you feel real emotion. Of course, as a kid, it was that feeling of complete and utter elation, swinging, soaring, flying through the city of New York with Spider-Man, but it was also the sadness and the hatred and the heartbreak of Peter Parker. Now at the time, I hadn't really ever encountered such raw and mature emotions like that. As a kid, you're not really supposed to experience the feeling of grief amongst other things, and luckily I've been fortunate enough to never have lost someone close to me. But having said that, and I don't necessarily mean to compare the feeling of losing a family member or a friend to something that is, at the end of the day, fictional, but as a kid, Uncle Ben's death was the closest thing I had to that. It was the closest thing I had to losing a real family member. I guess one of the reasons why this was the case was when I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandparents, maybe even more so than my actual parents, and Aunt May and Uncle Ben, I saw, and to be honest, I still see in my grandparents. So as you can imagine, the thought of losing them, of seeing that almost as a reality when watching the first Spider-Man film was devastating and still has the same impact on me today as it did when I was a kid.
They got the shooter. He's
He's headed south on 5th Avenue. We got 3 cars in pursuit. All right, folks, come on, help us out. Move back.
Spider-Man is also just a fucking great superhero film, guys. You know, there is a real warmth to this film that I truly miss in the superhero genre. I think very few directors over the years have been truly able to capture the essence of a comic book in their film, and Sam Raimi is one of the front runners in that category because, I mean, he directs the shit out of this movie. The characters, although sometimes cheesy as hell, feel so real. New York as a city, as an atmosphere, feels so immersive and tangible and almost like a character in and of itself. No doubt because Raimi really finds that sweet spot between practical and special effects filmmaking. The action is helmed so beautifully, and I just love how as the conflict and the tension between Spidey and Green Goblin builds and builds, so does the visceral nature and the violence of the fight sequences. I mean, fuck me. This final battle and conclusion is just insane, people. Insane. And oh my, I almost forgot to mention Danny Elfman's score, of which this whole trilogy would not be the same without. It is one of the very few film scores out there that has the ability to instantly bring me to tears on cue because it is very much the sound of my childhood. Guys, Spider-Man was a truly revolutionary film for me. It was somewhere I could go when I felt down and defeated, only to watch it and be re-inspired again. And that, to me, is what the character of Spider-Man is all about. Now, surely it does not get better than this. Right? Right, guys? It didn't get better than this, right? Wrong.
It's a web. Go, Spidey, go!
Spider-Man 2 takes everything the first film did great and dials it up to 11. It is not just a significant improvement in every single way, but a sequel that so beautifully and so naturally builds up the ending of its predecessor. In the conclusion of Spider-Man, Peter makes the ultimate choice to give up a life with Mary Jane, give up a life of everything he's ever wanted in order to be the hero, in order to be Spider-Man. In Spider-Man 2, we get to explore the impact, the consequences of that decision, the consequences of being Spider-Man, what being the Spider means for the man. Whilst the first film introduced me to the character of Spider-Man, this second film taught me what defines the character of Spider-Man. This was a concept that I began to understand more and more as I grew older with time. What truly defines the character of Spider-Man isn't his powers. It's not the fact that he makes quips when fighting bad guys. It's not the fact that he can shoot webs from his hands. Hell, it's not even the fact that he can stop a moving train with the physical strength of his body. Although yes, they're all part of what make him special. What actually defines the character of Spider-Man is struggle. It's the struggle of Peter Parker when trying to balance the great responsibility of being the hero with the life that he's always wanted for himself. And exploring that duality of, you know what, forget Spider-Man, exploring that duality of a superhero, to this day in my opinion, has never been done as well as it has in Spider-Man 2. I love the fact that Peter in this film walks away from his duties as Spider-Man to pursue a life for himself, because without moments like this, we would never truly feel the weight of moments like this. Spider-Man 2, like the first film, has one of my all-time favorite movie villains. Dr. Otto Octavius, played to perfection by the incredible Alfred Molina. I cannot wait to see him return in No Way Home.
Hello, Peter.
Now, when this film came out in 2004, I was already, of course, obsessed with the character of Spider-Man from watching the animated series and, of course, that first film. It's actually crazy because I can remember seeing posters walking down the street, looking out the car window and seeing these giant billboards that were advertising Spider-Man 2. And obviously, this just added to my excitement for seeing this film in a cinema. My parents, on the other hand, well, they had different plans. After hearing from someone I don't know who that Spider-Man 2 was far too violent and far too scary for kids, my parents decided not to take me to the cinema. And as you can imagine, my reaction went something like this. So I had to wait 5 months, guys, 5 whole months to see this film on DVD when it came out, because that's just how it was back at the time. New releases wouldn't just go straight to home entertainment after they left cinemas. 5 months, guys, 5 months that to me as a kid felt like 5 years. Betrayed by my own parents. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? The very people who showed me Spider-Man in the first place. How dare they? Anyways, the day came where I finally saw Spider-Man 2, and yep, I absolutely loved it. It was for sure my new favorite film at the time, but one scene in particular, how do I say this? One scene in particular scared the living shit out of me. This scene was probably the sole reason why I wasn't allowed to see it in cinemas. Yup, it's the hospital scene, and no doubt being as terrifying as it is because of Sam Raimi's filmmaking roots coming from none other than the horror genre. Just the way this whole scene is shot, directed, edited, with the absence of music making the screams like this one all tally up to present Doc Ock as the stuff of nightmares is just masterful. But guys, of course, there are so many great moments in Spider-Man 2, from the opening pizza delivery, to the birth of Doc Ock, to this moment, to the bank heist sequence, to this heartbreaking scene with Uncle Ben, to the raindrops falling on my head montage, to the train fight, one of the greatest fights in a superhero film ever, to Harry finding out Peter is Spider-Man, to the final confrontation between Spidey and Doc Ock, to MJ finding out Peter is Spider-Man, to the final swing. Spider-Man 2 is one of the greatest superhero films of all time. It came to redefine what the comic book genre and modern blockbusters could be, and just like the first film, it was and still is one of my favorite films of all time.
Now dig on this.
Okay, so this is where things start to get a little complicated. Spider-Man 3 I do still find enjoyment out of. I certainly enjoyed it more when I was younger. I thought it was the cool one out of the trilogy, and that was mainly due to the fact that I was fascinated by the black suit. In fact, I remember when I was 8 years old, I was on an 11-hour plane journey to South Africa, and I don't know about you guys, but I have a really difficult time sleeping on planes. So instead, for those 11 hours, 22 if you count the way back, I was watching Spider-Man 3 again and again and again, and I never, not once, got bored of it. Don't get me wrong, this is easily the worst of the Raimi trilogy, mainly because the studio completely overstuffed the film. There is so much going on, so many characters, so many plot lines that jump from one to the other, that none of them really get the time or proper focus needed to be fully fleshed out and give us truly satisfying conclusions. Although I will say that Sam Raimi does his best to tie up some ends very nicely. Spider-Man 3 might have gone on to become a cultural punching bag for comic book and film fans alike, but I still have fun with it every single time I revisit it. It has some of the worst things in a Spider-Man film, but also, surprisingly, some of the best. I absolutely love Sandman as a villain. He's one that you can root for because of the desperate circumstances he finds himself in with regards to his daughter. I think the birth of Sandman is one of the highlights of the entire film, not just from a special effects standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint as well. Christopher Young's music in this scene is so good. I also think that having Flint Marko connected to the death of Uncle Ben was such a brave choice, and one that I actually respect because it establishes an emotional foundation for the conflict between Spider-Man and Sandman. When they're fighting, especially here, you feel every punch, every kick, every scream. Peter feels nothing but pure hatred for this man, the man he believes to have killed his Uncle Ben, and the way he fights is absolutely brutal. I remember watching this scene for the first time and being completely shocked to the core, which brings me onto the black suit. Was it the right time to bring in Venom? Probably not, but I didn't care. I was a kid, and did this film make me want to have a black suit for myself? Absolutely. I didn't care that it turned you into a douche who parades around New York doing the most cringe dance moves ever.
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye.
No, the black suit was fucking awesome. It made you faster, stronger, more enhanced, and it also gave us shots like this, and this. In hindsight, do I think the Venom arc would have benefited much more if it had an entire film dedicated to it? Yeah, for sure, but we got what we got, and what Venom, what the black suit represents for the character of Spider-Man, the ultimate battle of good and evil, right and wrong, that's within every single one of us, that shit is great. And without moments like this wouldn't be so emotionally satisfying. Guys, I don't actually mind Spider-Man 3. I think it's fine. I don't think it's anywhere near the quality of the first two films, but I actually prefer the fact that it took risks and it had real stakes to it. And that is something that I find lacking in the more recent films, which we'll get onto very soon. Fast forward 5 years to 2012. 5 years of Spider-Man drought and endless nights of crying myself to sleep thinking about how we were never going to see Spider-Man 4 with Tobey.
No, please. Please don't say that.
The Amazing Spider-Man was released at a rather odd time in my life. Not only did it come out between the first Avengers film and The Dark Knight Rises, but at this point I was no longer a kid watching superhero films. Now I was a young teenager, 13 years old to be specific, and the best part about it, I did not need my parents to take me to the cinema. I'd finally escaped the curse of Spider-Man 2. The rules were different and so was I. I had a little more of a mature, a little more of an experienced mindset when watching movies. The first time I saw The Amazing Spider-Man, it became apparent very quickly that I was watching a completely different take on the webhead. This time they'd exchanged the warm, cheesy, but ultimately nostalgic tone of the Raimi films with a darker, more grounded and more realistic texture. Look guys, The Amazing Spider-Man is not anywhere near a perfect film. It has its issues. For starters, it treads a very similar line to Raimi's first Spider-Man film in that it more or less tells the exact same story with a couple of additional nuances here and there, but ones that for me are just not enough to really challenge my expectations of what Spider-Man's origin is. It also has this whole mystery with Peter's dad as this overarching narrative that weaves in and out whenever the film needs it to, and as a result, even though I was interested by it, I was never really fully invested in it. With regards to the Lizard as a main villain, I thought the fact that Peter essentially created him was a promising start to the main conflict of the film, but ends up falling flat due to a lack of development. The Lizard character just becomes reduced to a CGI monster with a ridiculous master plan of turning everyone into reptiles, what the fuck, that also happens to give Spider-Man a beating every now and then. Those are some of the issues with this film. However, I think I might prefer this film to Spider-Man 3. Now to some of you that might be a given, but to others that might sound outrageous, but the reason I actually prefer watching The Amazing Spider-Man is because when I do, I feel like I'm watching real human beings. Mark Webb understands people. He understands how people talk. He understands how people fight. He understands how people love. Just go and watch the beautiful and heartfelt 500 Days of Summer and see for yourself. In the case of The Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker feels like someone you'd actually have in your school growing up. This is exactly what teenagers are like. I should know, I was that age. And there's a real authenticity that comes from this film that I don't think is as present in any of the other Spider-Man films to date. This feels like a teen drama disguised as a Spider-Man film. And to a lot of people that is gonna suck, but I've actually come to really admire it for that reason. The dynamic that Peter has with his aunt and uncle in this film feels real. The growing relationship Peter has with Gwen Stacy feels real. The heartbreak that Peter endures after losing his uncle feels real. I cried when I saw this scene in the cinema, but no doubt because Peter Parker in this film feels real. Andrew Garfield might not be my personal favourite Spider-Man, that ultimately goes to Tobey, but he gives the best performance out of the three in my eyes. This is someone who cares so deeply about Spider-Man. Someone who shares the same love for the character that I do. So every time I watch The Amazing Spider-Man, there's almost this spiritual-like connection that I have when watching this character begin his journey to become one of the greatest superheroes of all time.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
Oh boy. So when I left the cinema for the first time after watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2, my head was so scrambled I did not know what to think. I didn't know if the film was good or bad, I didn't know if it was better than the first Amazing Spider-Man film, I didn't know whether to crawl up into a ball or be excited for what was supposedly next to come. I didn't know shit, my head was a mess. Of course, looking back on it now, this is probably the worst Spider-Man film. There is a lot that is wrong with this entry. The villains, the subplots, the fact that Sony ruined the entire film in the trailers, the fact that Sony ruined this entire film by trying to set up multiple sequels. They did my boy Andrew bad. Look, having said all that, this is at the end of the day a film that happens to have Spider-Man in it, and naturally, as a lifelong fan of this character, there are moments that no matter how bad the film around it is, I have a lot of love for. So here's a quick fire of my favourite aspects, moments, things about The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I love the whole look of this film, the visuals are stunning, this is easily one of the best looking Spider-Man films. I love the swinging sequences, this is probably my favourite Spider-Man suit, with Tobey's classic suit coming in as a close second. I love this scene with Peter and Aunt May arguing over laundry. The smaller moments like these really do make a huge difference, and speaking of which, Sally Field as Aunt May I think is so underrated. I think she might just be my favourite portrayal of the character. Just like the first film, I love how Mark Webb gives time to the relationship between Peter and Gwen. I know it's been said so many times, but Andrew and Emma's chemistry is just magnetic, and they are ultimately the glue that holds these films together. Like seriously, I cannot help but smile every time they're on screen together. I actually love the ending. I remember crying when Peter failed to catch Gwen. God damn it, you know what? The Amazing Spider-Man films might not be that great, but fuck me, they got me emotional as hell, so I guess they must be doing something right. Anyways, I love how listening to Gwen's speech from the beginning of the film gives Peter the strength to get back out there and be the hero that the city needs. I love how this kid reminds me of me when I was younger. And yeah, I love this final shot here as Hans Zimmer's Spidey theme blasts in the background and concludes this film on a high.
Underoos!
Jump ahead 3 years later and I'm on a lad's holiday in the Greek islands having the absolute time of my life, but there's a part of me that can't help but think about what the rest of the world is currently experiencing. Whilst I'm on holiday, Spider-Man Homecoming has hit cinemas and I'm desperately trying to dodge spoilers all over social media. But then the last day of the holiday comes and I have a little homecoming of myself. Get it? Because I was coming home. The whole squad is exhausted from drinking, exhausted from partying, exhausted from doing what all 18-year-olds do after they finish sixth form, but not me. I wasn't tired. I couldn't allow myself to be tired. I had a film to catch. So the very same day we landed back in London, I rallied what remaining troops I could persuade to come to the cinema with me, and we went to see Spider-Man Homecoming. And I had a pretty good time with this film. Was Spider-Man Homecoming my favourite Spider-Man film? Definitely not. But I thought Tom Holland was great in the role, even though he did play Peter Parker a bit like a 12-year-old as opposed to a 15-year-old, but that's fine. I loved how Homecoming started off with this vlog style segment, seeing the events of Civil War through Peter's perspective. I loved how Homecoming captured the tone of a classic American high school teen flick. Yes, give me more of these John Hughes vibes. I loved how the story was on an intimate, small-scale basis and not an Avengers-level threat. I loved Michael Giacchino's new theme for Spider-Man, and I loved even more how he recorded the score with an actual orchestra. Yes, you can tell the difference. And boy oh boy, I loved Michael Keaton as the Vulture. Yes, we finally had a great Spider-Man villain back on the big screen. Adrian Toomes, a character you understand from the very first few minutes of the film. Someone who just wants to provide for his family, but also happens to look real fucking scary in the process of doing so.
Good old Spider-Man.
But even then, I felt like there was a missing piece, you know? I felt like Vulture was missing a personal touch. The best Spider-Man villains, to me at least, have always been somewhat connected to Peter Parker. And then wait, holy shit, no fucking way.
He must be Peter.
I think I actually let out some sort of panicked yelp in the cinema when this happened. Man, this twist was genius, and it was exactly what I was looking for going into the third act of Homecoming. Stakes that weren't just physical, but stakes that were personal to both our hero and our villain. And yeah, we do get a typical MCU final battle, but let's be honest, the real scene sealer was this moment right here. A moment that you felt both the literal and emotional weight on our hero. A moment taken straight out of the pages of the comic books, and a moment that for me went down as one of the best in live action Spider-Man. Guys, Spider-Man Homecoming has been one of the few comic book films that has actually got better for me on rewatch, and I think the film is terrific. We're in 2019 now, a few months after this, and after this. Peter Parker is now a changed man, a man haunted by the death of Tony Stark, a Peter Parker who is different to the Peter Parker they were here. What the f***? At least for the first 10 minutes he is, and then he goes back to being Homecoming Peter, and guys, that is one of my biggest problems with Spider-Man Far From Home. Overall, I like this film, but I don't think it challenges the moral responsibility of Peter Parker enough. His character doesn't change, his character doesn't grow. At least in Homecoming, Tony took away the suit, so Peter almost had to sort of relearn what it meant to be Spider-Man in the first place. It wasn't about the gadgets, it wasn't about the fancy suits, it wasn't about being an Avenger. Spider-Man Far From Home, however, does a complete 180 on those lessons. Going into the final act of this film, Peter just goes ahead and makes another suit with the click of a few buttons. That's not Spider-Man, that is not who Spider-Man is. Spider-Man has always been about the struggle of responsibility. How are we supposed to see Peter struggle if he's always getting things handed to him on a plate? Nothing feels earned. Beating Mysterio here doesn't feel earned. Saving the world doesn't feel earned. I wish I felt more at the end of Far From Home. Once again, I don't think this is a bad film. It does have some really good aspects to it, like the Mysterio illusion sequence, for example. That's some of the most creative visuals I've ever seen in a Spider-Man film. The performances, once again, are fantastic, and the actors all have great chemistry with one another. I love seeing my boy Jake in an MCU film, even if I'm conflicted on the writing for his character. I love how the film goes international, from New York to Venice to Prague to my home city of London, really demonstrating that Spider-Man isn't a superhero to just be loved in one location, but a character who is loved all over the world. Guys, Spider-Man Far From Home is far from a bad film. It's a film that I could still watch and have a lot of fun with, but I want to see the character of Spider-Man taken a little more seriously moving forward. Less of the jokes and more of the heart of this amazing character. I think revealing Spider-Man's identity to the world at the very end of the film is a ballsy but great way to present Peter Parker with some real challenges and really grow him as a character. That is what I want to see in No Way Home. Of course, I'm gonna instantly cry my eyes out if and when we see Tobey and Andrew show up, but I don't want to leave the cinema on a high just because of fan service, which, believe me, I'm very susceptible to. I want to first and foremost see a great Spider-Man film, and I think No Way Home definitely has the potential to be one of the best. The opportunities are there, but whether or not they're fully utilized, we'll have to wait and see. Guys, thank you so much for watching me and listening to me ramble on about this character and these films. To be completely honest with you guys, I've only scratched the surface with all the memories I have attached to this character. Spider-Man means a lot to me, as I'm sure is the same case with a lot of you, so if you do share that same love and that same passion for this character, do leave a like on this video. Comment your thoughts, your experiences, your memories attached to this character, and also what your personal ranking of the films are, as well as who your favorite Spider-Man is. Is it Tobey? Is it Andrew? Is it Tom? Let me know. On a final note, guys, if you did enjoy the video, do consider subscribing to the channel, and stay tuned for my thoughts on Spider-Man No Way Home, which is only a few days away. Guys, once again, thank you so much for checking out this video, and I will catch you very soon in the next.